The Secrets of Doctor Who is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, episode 252. Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, where we discuss everything about the hit BBC series Doctor Who. And today we're discussing the 11th Doctor story, Cold War. And joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Akin. Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
And Father Cory Sticha. Hey, Father Cory.
How's it going?
Very well, thanks. Folks, if you can, we would really appreciate it. It really helps us a lot if you write a review of the podcast on Apple Podcasts. Now, it may seem like a small thing, but it is a big deal. It helps us a lot to get the show out in front of more people. And, of course, when you share the podcast with your TARDIS-loving friends, that helps us grow our community and reach more people. I want to tell you about another show that's on the StarQuest Network called Let's Science, a wonderful show, about 15 to 20 minutes every other week from our friends down in Australia, the Catholics of Oz, Caroline, Lindsay, and Lino, and they talk about some fun science topic. It's always a lot of fun. You want to check it out. It's at sqpn.com/science or wherever you find fine podcasts.
We should mention that the Catholics of Oz are three people, not two. It's Caroline, Lindsay, and Lino, not Caroline, Lindsay, and Lino.
I've had too much coffee this morning, so that may be part of the problem. I know I'm a fast talker. People have told me. And stick around to the end of the episode because we are going to have some of your listener feedback. Before we get to talking about Cold War, there has been some Doctor Who news that we should discuss. By the time you're hearing this, it's been out for a few weeks. But the big news is we knew that Chris Chibnall, the showrunner for Doctor Who in the most recent season and the next one, is leaving the show.
Yay!
Yeah.
And so we were all wondering who's going to take over. Will it be the guy who did Babylon 5, J. Michael Straczynski, who said he was interested, which I thought was a very interesting idea.
That would be interesting.
Yeah.
It'd be awesome, but the idea of an American showrunner is not going to happen.
No. Well, we do know who the showrunner is going to be, and if you're a Doctor Who fan, you probably already know this, but it's Russell T Davies returning to the TARDIS. He's the one who brought back Doctor Who in 2005 and stuck with it till 2010?
Something like that. It was 5 years, I think. 6 years.
Yeah.
I didn't look it up, but it was something like that. And so he's coming back after more than a decade away. What do you guys think of this development?
Oh, boy. I was never a fan of his original run. As much as I was grateful that he brought Doctor Who back, I wasn't as big a fan of his as I was Moffat's. And some of the stuff he's done since Doctor Who, I've not watched, but you read, the synopses of it, and it's a lot of, LGBTQ and social justice and stuff like that. And I don't know if I'm really excited about him coming back because he's going to be bringing that with him again.
Well, I think I have a bit of a different approach on that because Russell T Davies has produced a lot of problematic material, but he also did that before Doctor Who.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems to me that in bringing back Doctor Who, he had a sense of, okay, this needs to be a family show with a broad audience. And even though he would slip in little Captain Jack elements here and there, he realized this is not a platform for that kind of stuff. And so he focused on fun, interesting storytelling, and he did some really great work. I mean, Midnight is phenomenal.
Yeah. Yes.
And even Love and Monsters is good until the conclusion.
Yes.
I still beg to differ, but
falls apart at the conclusion. So I think he's a better storyteller than Chris Chibnall, and I think he, at least in between 2005 and 2009 or 10, whenever it was he left, he had a sense of what this show needs to be about, better than Chris Chibnall has displayed. And so I would, even though he's not my ideal showrunner, I would view it as a step in the right direction in terms of salvaging Doctor Who at this point.
Yeah.
On the other hand, society has changed in the last 10, 15 years, and television has changed in the last 10, 15 years. And so Russell T Davies might come back and think, oh, well, now I have more liberty to do all the stuff I kept on a leash back then. And we could get a continuation of Dr. Woke instead of Doctor Who.
Yeah.
And if it's more Dr. Woke, I'm not going to be enthusiastic about it.
Mm-hmm.
Although even then, the storytelling should be better.
Right.
I think I agree with much of what you both said. In fact, I think he's being brought in to like you said, salvage Doctor Who. This is a response to Chibnall's tinkering and messing with Doctor Who's fundamentals, and they want this sends a message to fans: we're bringing back this guy who saved Doctor Who in the past, and here he is. And I think that's part of why they're bringing him in.
And that also could be a message to Russell T Davies himself that you need to do what you did the first time. We're not looking for Chris Chibnall type stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that could itself play a role in producing a better show.
And it's better special effects, better CGI, but the formula you did before worked really well. Let's go back to it.
Right. And that Dr. Donna season was one of the best. That was the best of Davies' seasons. I think was that last season there with the Doctor and Donna and Wolf, who was one of my favorite secondary characters. It gives me some hope. Yes, Russell T Davies gave us the Slitheen. I know we will remember that, but I'm looking forward to see what he does.
I'm sure he even he realizes the mistake there. One question will be interesting is, will he continue with what Chibnall has set down insofar as the Timeless Child, or will he retcon that out? Which, I mean, I like the idea of the Timeless Child. I don't have a problem with it. I think it's cool that there's more out there that we could explore. Yeah. But I could also see him saying, okay, yeah, this was a radical change to the show, and I think we need to walk this back somehow.
Yeah, I think it would be very unlikely for him to do that.
Yeah.
Because he has a tendency to honor the canon.
Mm-hmm.
There are things he could have ejected Paul McGann's Doctor entirely.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And didn't. And it would I don't think the Timeless Child is that radical a change to the show.
Right.
All it does is restore mystery to the Doctor.
Yeah.
And I think uprooting that now that it's been planted would cause more problems than it would solve.
I think at most he would just sort of ignore it and
he could do that.
Move on. Yep. I think the Timeless Child stuff will be wrapped up as much as he can by Chibnall in his last season. But I'm also curious, what he does for his new Doctor. What that will tell us a lot, who he chooses to be Doctor. I mean, maybe Tennant will come back. let's have a complete reboot back to the 10th Doctor.
Well, that can happen. I mean, Moffat showed us the Doctor can return to previous faces if he wants.
That's right. Oh, that would be interesting. I love David Tennant, so whatever. That would be great. All right. So that's we'd love to hear from you, listeners, what you think of this change and the news about Russell T Davies coming back. And you can email us at drwho@sqpn.com. But our primary purpose for being here today is to talk about this episode, the 11th Doctor story called Cold War. And Jimmy, if you could you give us a recap?
This week, Doctor Who does The Hunt for Red October meets Howard Hawks's The Thing from Another World meets Ridley Scott's Alien meets H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Badness. The year is 1983. It's a dangerous moment in the Cold War when a Russian sub under the North Pole is disabled by thawing out an ice warrior they found frozen in a block of ice. The sub sinks below its safe diving depth, so it's fallen and it can't get up. The ice warrior thinks his people are dead after having his warrior's code violated by a Russian seaman. He decides to take vengeance on Earth by starting a nuclear war using one of the sub's missiles. But the Doctor and Clara are able to talk him down from this, and eventually a Martian UFO shows up, returns the sub to the surface, and takes the ice warrior back to Mars. The end.
So a few preliminaries. This is the first appearance of the Ice Warriors in New Who, although it won't be the last, of course. It's fun that we're talking about this episode now because we just talked about the first appearance of the Ice Warriors in Doctor Who.
Not only is this the first of the Ice Warriors in New Who, it's the first since the third Doctor's time.
Right.
The last time we saw one was the Monster of Peladon in John Pertwee's era.
Right, right. So yeah, it's an interesting idea to bring them back from that long past.
And we see a lot more of them going forward, including seeing them on Mars itself at one point.
That's a fun one. We talked about that before. That's the 12th Doctor.
Yeah, the one we're referring to there is Empress of Mars, and it was written by the same author that wrote this, Mark Gatiss.
Yeah.
So he's apparently got a thing for Ice Warriors and Mars.
So another first in this episode was the first time, and we'll talk about it maybe later, but I wanted to bring it up as one of the preliminaries. First time a companion actually stays put when the Doctor tells them to remain where they are. I just thought that was funny. The mention was made of that.
They kind of riff on that because the Doctor tells Clara, "Stay here," and she's like, "Okay, don't argue with me. I'm not going to argue." It's like, whoa, that's the first time in 900 years of phone box travel.
That's right. That was kind of fun. And then, I want to talk a little bit about the setting because this is a setting I'm kind of familiar with because I've read
been trapped on a Russian submarine before.
So let it be revealed now. No, not firsthand necessarily. But I back in this era, I read Hunt for October. I read a lot of nonfiction books about submarines and the Cold War and stuff like that. And so it was fun to kind of watch this. There are a couple of inconsistencies. We're under the ice cap, and then what do they show? Icebergs and water, open water.
Yep.
They're not actually under the ice. The North Pole would be a cap, despite global warming. It would still be a cap.
Well, and certainly in 1983 it was.
Yes, definitely.
Also, the underwater sub landed, so it can't go anywhere, is very much a base under siege. And between that and the Ice Warriors, this feels a lot like a modern take on a Patrick Troughton Doctor Who.
Right, like that first Ice Warriors episode in one sense, that although in that case the Ice Warriors were external and coming into the base, whereas this was a base under siege from inside. So,
right.
I'll talk a little about the cast. David Warner shows up as the scientist. I always love David Warner.
Yes, and so there we have the Whoniverse face issue showing up again, where there are only a limited number of faces to go around in the Doctor Who universe.
Where did we see David Warner before?
He's the first Doctor.
David Warner is the first Doctor? Where?
I'm sorry. Perhaps I'm mistaken on that, but David Warner was cast as the replacement for William Hartnell in Twice Upon a Time.
No,
am I confusing him with someone else?
You're thinking
David Bradley. Okay,
yeah,
my mistake in that case.
Well, David Warner has done voices for Doctor Who before. This is the first time he appears on screen.
Yeah. I mean, David Warner, it's like he was in Tron. He's been in a bunch of stuff like that. But he's fun in this as the crazy Russian scientist. Liam Cunningham, which anyone who watched Game of Thrones will have recognized, but he's done other things too, is the captain. And it's kind of great that you have a Scottish captain because Sean Connery did the captain in the movie version of Hunt for Red October. So it's a very clear, to me, a connection. All Russian sub-captains should be Scottish.
And I love the scene where Clara's kind of figuring out this whole TARDIS translates for you thing. Wait, I don't speak Russian. I'm speaking Russian? Are they speaking Russian? Yeah.
Right. So, and then you have the political officer. So, and that was one of the things that they didn't say outright. But the episode starts with the ship. It's a ballistic missile submarine, so it's carrying nuclear missiles, and they're doing an exercise. And in order to launch a missile, you have to have two officers. On American subs, it's a captain and first officer have to agree to launch. But on Russian subs, Soviet subs, it was the captain and the political officer who the captain technically outranks the political officer, but the political officer reports to up a separate chain of command.
He's up to the party.
The snitch.
Yes, he's the snitch.
And this kind of snitch does not get stitches.
No.
He's there with permission. By the way, the political officer's role in this was one that, again, it reminded me of the kinds of things we would have in Patrick Troughton era Doctor Who, because in a typical base under siege story in the second Doctor's time, you would have the Doctor and companions plop into a situation, and there would be an immediate question of can we trust them or not, and you would have typically the leader deciding, yeah, I guess we can trust them, and the leader's chief advisor would be, no, we can't trust them at all. They're spies. Right. And that's exactly what we have here.
Well,
that's
and
true.
he was the one that was ready to let's launch all the missiles now. I mean, he was very gung ho for start the war now and count the deaths later type of deal.
Right.
So he was very, very. That one note character that you would see, especially in like the Troughton era, where it was just launch nukes, let's kill them, let's eject them out the airlock, that kind of deal.
And consequently, he gets killed by the Ice Warrior because that's the fate of all of the characters who are barbarically irrational and don't trust the Doctor.
That's right.
That's what happens to that character.
So I didn't. There's a couple problems I had with the premise, but once I got past them, you set it aside. First, why is a Russian ballistic missile submarine doing oil exploration work in the Arctic? Like, this is not a thing that you send your most important nuclear assets to do. Okay, but okay. And then they've cut this figure, a mastodon or whatever they thought it was.
They thought it was a mammoth. It's like, dude, there's a reason we call mammoths mammoths. It's because they're mammoth in size. That's just big. That is not mammoth. How could you possibly think that's a mammoth?
And then for some reason a sailor says, "I'm not waiting. I'm melting him out of it because reasons."
Well, no. So he knows that he's not going to. I didn't have so much problem with that because the sailor is he just wants to see what's in the ice,
I guess.
And he's not realizing he's living in a movie where things in the ice will reanimate.
Right.
If you think about this in the real world, if some egghead scientist has found this fascinating ancient thing in a block of ice and you're never going to get to see it because it's going to be melted in some lab, you could say to yourself, hey, let's take a look at this thing. And, living in the real world, you're not expecting the thing to reanimate and kill you.
Yeah.
Just blame it on someone set the thermostat wrong.
Yeah.
So the Ice Warrior escapes and starts wreaking havoc. And the TARDIS, which apparently is headed for Las Vegas, gets redirected by the ship onto the bridge of this sub, which is, again, another one of these things is suspension of disbelief, because there's no way the TARDIS fits on the bridge of a submarine unless it's smaller on the outside, so we say.
Well,
but that's fine. That's fine.
Maybe it shrunk down a little bit before it landed.
That's right. Yeah.
One of the things that I wanted to point out is, so the time they've arrived, 1983, is one of the peaks of the Cold War.
Yeah.
Now, there is a tendency, whenever you find a story set in the Cold War, it's going to get described as at the height of the Cold War. And it's like, okay, no, the Cold War was not one big plateau where you can point to any random moment and say this was the height of the Cold War.
Right.
But 1983 really was one of the peaks of the Cold War. Leonid Brezhnev had died, and Yuri Andropov had seized control after his time. Andropov would not last long, and the Russians were really, really jittery in 1983 because, in part, NATO's annual Able Archer exercise, a set of war games that NATO would do every year, was being done again in 1983, and it was being done in a much more realistic way, where they were not just having people play heads of state. They actually, so Able Archer would involve it would be war games that would simulate an escalating situation leading up to a DEFCON 1, which means we're at nuclear war.
Mm-hmm.
In 83, for Able Archer 83, they made it more realistic, and they actually pulled in heads of state like Reagan and Thatcher and people like that to play themselves. And so the Russians are seeing the Western powers doing this even more realistic than usual scenario leading up to nuclear war with actual heads of state involved. And they're thinking, this is a ruse. They're doing it for real now. And so in hindsight, after this stuff got declassified, Able Archer 83 has been viewed as one of the moments like the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, that we actually came very close to nuclear war.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Was this around the same time as that situation with the Soviet colonel in the early warning system who
same era in the 80s.
Okay, where the everything said we had launched missiles at them, and he said, why would they launch missiles now? This was not during Able Archer, but a different time. But yeah.
And why would there only be one?
Right. That would seem like a bad idea.
Well, that's one thing I think those of us on the West don't realize is, we think of ourselves as the good guys and the Russians are the bad guys in this, but the Russians saw it the exact opposite. They were convinced that we were going to wipe them off the face of the earth. We were going to do anything we could to make sure that the Soviet Union doesn't survive, and that they were just defending the homeland, just as we would say our troops were defending the homeland.
And it didn't help to give press conferences where the press conference began. Reagan is saying things like, and we begin bombing in 5 minutes.
It was just a joke, but he didn't realize it was on air.
It was a quote unquote joke, but
Yeah.
the Russians didn't necessarily take it that way.
Yep.
I do like also in this that despite the Cold War setting, they never mention America.
Mm-hmm.
They mention the Western powers. And I like that they're not just focusing on America, because thinking about this as British television, there's this tendency to portray Americans as, they're the real aggressive people and they're the people who are going to get us into a war and stuff like that potentially. But by not mentioning America and by portraying NATO as a bloc, as the Western powers are doing this, because they did, it in a way is owning the British involvement in this. And I like that as British television, acknowledging, okay, we were part of this, and we were part of the tension in this period. We can't just, say, oh, it was the Americans. We were doing this too.
And they didn't get into the ideology, the communist versus democratic, and Thatcher and whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, that was another thing I have in my notes, that it's nice that the doctor isn't preaching.
Right.
Because you could just imagine if Peter Capaldi's 12th Doctor was here, how much we would be hearing about war and insulting us about being warriors and stuff. And in this, the 11th Doctor he doesn't want conflict, but like when the Russian captain is saying, I'm going to do what I have to do in order to protect my nation, the Doctor is like, fine, I just think there's another way.
Right.
And he's not preaching about it.
Well, and they even have, the ice warrior can smell the fact that you are a soldier, you're a warrior. And the captain immediately comes back, well, how about you?
Yeah.
That's an interesting...
That pointing out the doctor is a warrior too, or was during the Time War.
The other thing that's interesting is that the ice warrior himself, Marshal Skaldak, he's not a monster.
Grand Marshal Skaldak.
Oh, yes. And he's not a monster in the sense of where he's just, the evil bad guy, like a Cyberman or a Dalek. But the Doctor recognizes he's an honorable warrior who has been, dishonored and is out of sorts because he's been in ice for 3,000 years.
5,000.
Since 3000 BC. And he appeals to him and appeals to mercy. And I like the fact that they make this ice warrior, even though he's killing people and doing bad things, he's a complex motivations, shall we say. And it's not a matter of just defeating him and killing him at the end. It's a matter of, convincing
talking him off the ledge.
Yeah. I like that part of it.
Mm-hmm. Another interesting bit, and this is the part that really reminded me of At the Mountains of Madness. So the thing from another world and At the Mountains of Madness both involve frozen ancient life forms coming back and causing problems. And in At the Mountains of Madness, H.P. Lovecraft's old ones have been dug up by a group of scientists, and then the scientists start dissecting them, and then they reanimate, and then they counter-dissect the scientists.
Ooh.
Because they haven't been around, they haven't been awake for 10 million years. They don't know what these ape creatures are. And so they start dissecting the scientists. And then the other scientists finally show up and see what the old ones have done. And there's a scene very much like that in this episode where Skaldak has we don't see it. We get it all in reverse camera angles, but Skaldak has dissected some humans, and Clara and the professor, played by David Warner, are there, and they're like, the professor is like, those barbarians, and the doctor says not or those savages. The doctor says not savages, forensic. He's learning about humans and how they're built and what they can do. So this is apparently a clinical surgical thing. He didn't just tear them apart. And I would imagine Mark Gatiss had that scene from At the Mountains of Madness in mind when he wrote that, because it's such a great parallel. I also love the use of that scene in Clara's story arc in this episode, because early on, since Skaldak will smell a warrior both on the captain and on the doctor, Clara volunteers to go in and be the doctor's mouthpiece to talk to Skaldak and negotiate with him. And she does, and she's able to do it and is pleased with herself afterwards, even though they realize Skaldak wasn't in his armor and has escaped. She still talked to him, and the doctor, she's like, did I do good? And he's like, yeah, you did great. And so she's very pleased with herself, but then after she sees what happened to the soldiers or the seamen that got dissected, she's talking to the professor, and he's asking, what's wrong with you? And she says, well, I did the scary stuff. I went in and talked to him, and I was fine, but seeing those bodies, it just makes it a lot more real.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a nice emotional pivot, and that scene, actually, the dissection scene, plays a role in Clara's emotional journey in this episode.
Well, most companions, I think, especially in Modern Who, come to a moment where traveling with the Doctor isn't just a vacation among the stars, but where they're confronted with the danger of the Doctor, and it usually occurs relatively early, maybe even in the first episode.
The Doctor has a false advertising problem, because he sure makes it sound like you're going to have a vacation among the stars, and it ends up not being that really fast.
Right. And she got confronted. I mean, there was danger even in the Clara's first episode, but she gets confronted with the bloodiness of it, the
brutalness.
The brutality of the events right then and there in this episode. So it's interesting to see.
There's also another great bit in that scene where Clara and the professor are waiting. And this is the scene where the Doctor has told Clara, wait here.
Yes.
While he goes off and does something. They've established that the professor is a huge fan of Western music. Mm-hmm. He's a fan of Ultravox, which was a group I didn't really know. Mm-hmm. He's also a fan of Duran Duran, and to keep Clara's spirits up, he sings a little bit of Hungry Like a Wolf badly. But, he asks her while they're alone, is it true? Are you from the future? And she's like, yeah. Tell me what happens. And she's like, I'm not allowed to. No, I have to know. And she's like, no, I can't tell you. And he finally says, Ultravox, did they split up? and she doesn't answer the question, but yes, they did in 1987. But then they got back together, and then they split up again in 1996. And then they got back together again, and then they split up for final in 2013.
And they got back together right after this episode aired, because of course their music was featured. Yeah.
Oh, funny. That is awesome.
Yeah.
So we mentioned that, well, actually, I don't know if we mentioned, there is, in addition to being a base under sheet story, it's also a TARDIS separation story.
Quite the separation, too.
Oh, right. Yeah, because the doctor said he'd been fiddling with the hostile action displacement system and
HAD system.
HADS, and it activated and sent the TARDIS as far away as it could on the planet to the South Pole. So,
Yeah.
oops.
Well, yeah, and it's not meant to do that, but and it is interesting because at very early in the episode, as the sub is sinking, which is when the Doctor and Clara arrive, the sub is sinking, and the cabin of the sub is flooding, and the TARDIS just vanishes. And Clara actually asks, "What's going on with the TARDIS?" And the Doctor says, "Later." And then at the end of the episode, we get the explanation that the Doctor has been fiddling with the HAD system. And this is an actual thing from Classic Who. The hostile action displacement system is designed to, if the TARDIS is under attack, to move it out of the way. Not necessarily to the South Pole, but move it out of the way. And the system was first introduced in the Second Doctor's time in a story called The Crotons. And so we haven't come to it yet, but it does appear there, and it will continue to appear in Stephen Moffat's time now that it's been reintroduced.
Okay. They sent it to it went to Antarctica, the South Pole. I was just thinking that they mentioned why is there a cattle prod on board? They use Grushenko uses a cattle prod to disable the Skaldak, and they said,
a seaman does initially, and then the professor grabs it for self-protection.
That's right. And they said it's for polar bears, which I think is interesting because it is the Arctic, which means where bear place, and not the Antarctic, which means the no bear place. So if you ever want to remember where polar bears are, they're in the Arctic for the bear place. So I always thought that was funny. I made a note of that in my notes. I was going to get pedantic about submarines propulsion and moving laterally with propellers. That annoyed me, but that's a little pedantic. So I'll leave that be.
I also was concerned about, because they keep saying we're at 700 meters, like that's dangerous. And I knew we had subs that can go way beyond 700 meters. But it turns out that this particular type of sub couldn't.
Yeah.
So after looking it up, I gave him a pass on that.
Well, I wonder if they were thinking of like the cruise ships, especially that you have now, where they actually do have like jets on the side of the ship for doing sideways movement at port, especially.
I'm going to guess that some of the modern subs might have lateral thrusters, but the doctor says use the propellers to push the sub sideways, and propellers only push subs forward. And then they have rudders to steer, but you can't push it just doesn't work that way. So anyway, and they could work independent. They said the turbines are offline. They could work off of batteries. So that was could be accurate. So anyway, just that annoyed me.
Well, and they do talk about we're operating on battery power at one point.
Yes, right. So that would make sense. Also, submarines don't rise and sink because of propulsion. They do it through ballast, taking on water or expelling it.
Next episode on Secrets of Submarines, we'll be talking about...
I wasn't going to get pedantic, but, we opened that door and I stepped through it. That's all there is to it.
I will say I did like the submarine environment because of how different it is than other environments we get on the show. The closest would be like being trapped in a spaceship, like maybe in 42.
Mm-hmm.
But I like the sub environment. It's pretty low tech, and the fact they're at below their safety limit means we get some leakage, which is visually interesting as you see water dripping around the set. And at one point, the doctor is racing down a hallway and skids in the water.
Right.
And I just like the physicality of this environment and how different it is than what we normally get.
And they didn't just find some industrial factory location and film there. You know what I mean? This really felt like we built a submarine set, with the closeness and the that sort of thing.
Or rented one.
Certainly rented it. I mean, they could have even been on a ship, but a real ship. But it did not feel like we're trying to convince you that this chemical factory is a submarine.
Boat.
Boat. Well,
Yeah.
yes, the submarines are referred to as boats. Any other notes on this episode, Father Cory?
Well, I got a kick out of the, guns because, of course, the Russians have to have guns, but pistols, I mean, I'm not an expert on Russian pistols. So this may be what they look like, but they look more like, American 1911 pistols to me than what Russians would use. And I can guarantee you Russians wouldn't have used them.
No.
And then, AK-47s on a submarine, that's not going to end well if you open up with that.
I was just wondering about this. Guys, you're waving around slug throwers on a pressurized vessel. Really?
And it's slug throwers is like the AKs that are designed to, penetrate armor, human armor. Like say, I mean, they can go,
really.
they can go through. They can.
It won't go through the
something.
hull, but it would go through important stuff inside. I was just looking up the.
Oh, also, and then there's ricochets too.
Yes.
But you're in a pressurized vessel below safe diving depths, and you're throwing slugs. That does not sound like a good idea.
So just to answer your question, Father Cory, that was a Tokarev pistol was the standard issue, and it does look like a 1911. So okay,
so it's probably the Russian ripoff of a 1911 then, because we know they did a lot of that actually.
Yeah, but there are. Yeah, they wouldn't have had. Never mind. We're really getting into the weeds of the secrets of Soviet weaponry. But
back to Doctor Who.
Back to Doctor Who. Anything else, Father Cory?
That was it.
Jimmy?
So I liked the fact that Skaldak's armor is autonomous.
Mm-hmm.
So once he's out of his armor, he can still direct the armor to do things. So it provides a double threat. He is a threat himself, and his armor remains a threat. That's nice. I like that. The CGI of Skaldak, now we don't see a lot of him out of his armor. We see his hands, but which are done with a practical effect. But his head, when we finally see his head, is CGI, and it is not great. I don't even think it was great for the time this was made, but that's not what I'm ultimately interested in. So I care more about the story than the CGI. The mutually assured destruction element that they present us with at the end, I thought was a little heavy-handed. Because what they've done is Skaldak has armed the missile launch system, and all he has to do is press a button, and he'll launch a missile that will start World War III. The Doctor, meanwhile, has got his sonic screwdriver, and he says, "I will destroy us all before you can press that button." And so apparently the sonic screwdriver is quite the weapon if it can destroy all of them before he can even press a button. And I thought that was interesting, but I thought given that they brought up the concept of mutually assured destruction between the Western powers and the Eastern powers earlier in the episode, I thought is a little heavy-handed. The way they play it out with the Doctor and Skaldak, putting them in essentially the same situation.
Right.
Also one other thing, since this has become Secrets of Submarines.
Sure.
You can't launch nuclear missiles from 700 meters down.
No.
They will be crushed by the water pressure. You need to launch them within 50 meters of the surface.
Very good. Yes.
So there we go.
Thank you for not making me have to be more of my facts about submarines. I'm like the kid with the dinosaurs. Anyway, thank you, Jimmy. I think that about does it for our discussion of this episode. I mentioned we were going to talk about some listener feedback, and so we have some feedback on our recent episode 247 on the First Doctor episode, The Crusade, and we got this on our YouTube channel. R.O. wrote, "One of my favorite episodes in the entire series, I think. The direction has a very filmic feel, from the opening shots of the mysterious TARDIS arriving in the middle of a battle to the wonderful revealing shot of Saladin listening from behind the curtain." I agree. It actually did have that feel of those, sword and sandal epics of the 50s and 60s that we often see. The way the shots are framed and that sort of thing. The directors went to some pains to give it that feel. So I agree. I like that.
Which is all the more difficult because you know that they had much smaller sets, obviously way smaller budgets than a lot of those film epics, and yet they were able to do some of that with what they had.
Yeah. They used a lot of different sets too, and a lot of interior sets for that.
By the way, speaking of the Doctor Who universe face shortage problem, Saladin, I forget if we mentioned it, but Saladin was played by the actor Bernard Kay,
Yes.
who has appeared in other episodes of Doctor Who. One that we've already talked about is the second Doctor episode, The Faceless Ones, where he plays Inspector Crossland from the police. And he's also, I guess, in a third Doctor serial where he plays a guy named Caldwell. Just last night, I was actually watching a series I've never seen before. Someone, a viewer of or listener of Mysterious World, recommended a series to me called Jonathan Creek, which is it's a detective series, and it's about a guy who designs tricks for magicians, who uses his knowledge of stage magic to solve how locked room mysteries happen and things like that. And so instead of a whodunit or Columbo's How Catch 'Em, it's more of a How Done It show. And someone suggested after your and my psychic testing episode, Dom, that I might enjoy this series. So I checked it out, and I was watching an episode of it, and I'm going, who is this actor? I know this guy. It was Bernard Kay. It's like, oh, okay, that's Inspector Crossland and Saladin and this Caldwell guy. And it's like, okay, I knew this guy from somewhere, and it was Doctor Who.
Yeah, he was also Carl in Dalek Invasion of Earth from the first Doctors.
Right. Oh, and also in the pilot episode or pair of pilot episodes of Jonathan Creek, the very first murder victim on the show is Colin Baker.
Oh, funny!
And he's playing this artist who gets offed.
Well, if he was anything like the Sixth Doctor, maybe that would. Now I want to watch that.
He was a little flamboyant, and you may not want to watch the episode with children around.
Oh, okay, I see.
I mean, he was doing artistic nudes with like clown faces.
Oh, you clowns! That's my problem. That's why I don't want to watch it. All right. Well, on that note, we should wrap things up. We'll take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Doctor Who, including Martin G., Jorge F., Tim D., Sean F., and John C. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Doctor Who and all the shows at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. And we'd also like to thank Victor Lambs, who edits the show for us every week. So that's it from us. What did you think of the 11th Doctor story, Cold War? You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com or the Secrets of Doctor Who Facebook page, or send an email to drwho@sqpn.com. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the 4th Doctor story, The Seeds of Doom. Until then,
boy.
Father Cory Sticha, thank you for joining me and sharing the Secrets of Doctor Who.
Thank you, Dom.
Jimmy Akin, thank you as well.
Thanks, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Doctor Who on StarQuest. And remember, the Cold War won't stay cold forever, Captain.